Hello everyone and welcome to week 4 of our class. Today we will speak about group processes including obedience, conformity and groupthink. So first let's talk about conformity. Conformity is a type of a social process involving a change in behavior or belief in order to fit in with a group. There are several approaches to conformity. So Ash conducted some experiments with lines. So a person was asked to choose which of the 3 lines on the right card matches the length of the line on the left card. When a majority of the group gave wrong answer, many participants chose to agree with it. So Ash concluded that people conform for 2 main reasons: because they want to fit in the group, they want to fit in with the group, which is a normative influence, and because they believe the group is better informed than they are, which is informational influence. So what majority believes must be correct, although it sometimes contradicts what we think and what's reality. So conformity tends to increase as the size of the group increases, but there is a little change in conformity once the group reaches 4 to 5 members. So you can watch about this experiment more on a YouTube video that I have under this slide in the notes in PPT that I will publish on Blackboard. So what are some motivations for conformity? Festinger, who also one of the scholars who looked into conformity as a phenomenon, he stressed the importance of informational influence. So there is a reliance on other people in the verification of personal theories of the world. So usually it increased in a situation of uncertainty or danger. Levine, another scholar, showed that attractiveness of a group plays an important part in the development of obedience. People show higher obedience if they like the group, and they also show more group solidarity. Another scholar who looked into conformity, Deutsch, emphasized normative influence. So that people tend to avoid negative perception by others, and that's why they conform. So people conform to the group perceptions because they want to be viewed positively by other group members. So one interesting conclusion of this theory is that we are attracted to people with similar views because they provide validation to our own ideas. Turner, another scholar who investigated conformity, showed and identity, showed the role of social identity and self-stereotyping in conformity, the process of conformity. So as we accept membership in the group, we adopt certain group norms and beliefs. And we also share similar beliefs as the other group members. Okay, so this is a very famous experiment by Milgram, and you will find also the video links in the PowerPoint under this slide, and please watch them because it's quite interesting. And this was a really cutting edge kind of an experiment, and it showed certain ways people act in groups, the group dynamic, and why people follow authority. So, Milgram conducted an experiment focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. So, we talked before about this, ability to choose. Do we have this ability to choose even when circumstances are such that we would feel more safe to just go with the flow and with the decision of the whole groups and just follow what the others are doing? So he really tested this obedience to authority and personal conscience, which is really interesting. So participants of experiments were asked to administer an electric shock every time the learner in other room makes a mistake, increasing the level of a shock each time. So when a person refused to administer a shock and turned to the experimenter for guidance, he was given the instruction to continue. So what's interesting that 2/3 of participants continued to the highest level of these electric shocks. The highest level was 450 volts, which is quite a lot. But it was, of course, the person in the other room was only acting, so he was not really given an electric shock, but was just screaming as if he was given this electric shock. So for Milgram, it was important to see what the person giving the electric shocks, which is in a way kind of a torture, how far this person would go. So Milgram concluded that the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of this study. So really, when we think about it, why people commit terrible crimes in the conflict, in the war, well, some of the reasons can be found within this study. Why people commit atrocity, genocide, something that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So that's one of the explanations. Of course, not the only explanation, but an interesting theory that we in conflict resolution should be aware of. Okay, so another important social process in groups is polarization. So the decisions and opinions of people in a group setting become more extreme than their actual privately held beliefs. So, for example, during the group discussion, based on the exchange of information, the differences in values fade and common group's attitude toward that situation becomes stronger. In this process, group also can be divided in several extreme parts based on some prototypical positions of its members. So when you have a bunch of people with similar ideas talk, and after this talk, they all have stronger views than before, right? So that's polarization. And this theory, I think, explains very well the extremism, how people take on more extreme views that they didn't have before, right? Okay, groupthink. Another interesting and important social process is a groupthink. So groupthink is when everyone usually agree with one another because they want to avoid going against the norm or disrupting the harmony of the group. So it can be described in the analysis of Cuban crisis. So it was found that in groups, members ignore obvious danger, take extreme risks, or are overly optimistic. They discredit warning contrary to the group thinking and pressure any in the group who express arguments against the group's stereotypes, illusions, or commitments, viewing such opposition as disloyalty, marking it as disloyalty. So members believe their decisions are morally correct, ignoring the ethical consequences of their decisions. The group constructs these negative stereotypes, sometimes ideas that are not true, and especially stereotypes of rival group, of outside group, of the other, and members withhold their dissenting views and counter arguments, and perceive falsely that everyone agrees with the group's decision. And often in such group processes, silence is seen as consent. And then some members take on roles, they appoint themselves to protect the group from adverse information that might threaten group complacency, group's consensus. So Cuban Crisis is an example. You can see again the videos of groupthink process that, because of this groupthink kind of a dynamics, that rational thinking is often put aside, and the leadership can, or the people in that particular group can actually make wrong decisions. So it can be dangerous too. Okay. So what are the results of group thinking? Well, as I said, the group makes faulty decisions in comparison to the decision that could have been reached using a fair, open, and rational decision-making process. So it fails to adequately determine its objectives and alternatives, and it fails also to assess the risks associated with the group's decision. So the group usually does not seek expert advice, and they don't listen. They only select and use information that supports their position and conclusions. Okay, so finally, a group doesn't make contingency plans in case their decision and resulting actions fail. So usually the results of groupthink are faulty decisions and negative consequences. Okay, so now this is an interesting experiment again that a psychologist, Muzafer Sherif, has done. So this is a famous social psychologist, Muzafer Sherif, who wanted to understand why groups and its members behave in certain way, sometimes irrationally. Why do they have prejudices? Why do they have stereotypes and so on? How these stereotypes are created. So Sherif's main contribution is known as a realistic conflict theory, and it accounts for group conflict, negative prejudices, and stereotypes as being the result of competition between groups for some desired resources. So what happened in this robber's cave? Okay, we'll talk about it in the next slide. So basically what Sherif argued is that intergroup conflict occurs when two groups are in competition for limited resources. And let's now look at the experiment that proves his arguments. So what happened in this robber's cave? So the 22 boys in the study were unknown to each other, but they were all from white middle-class backgrounds. They all shared, so the groups had to be from similar backgrounds so that he would see, how stereotypes and prejudice arises among pretty similar members of a certain group, right? So they all shared Protestant, two-parent background, and they didn't know each other. The boys didn't know each other prior to this study. They were randomly assigned to one of the two groups, and they were then, as individual groups, picked up by the bus in the summer of 1954 and transported to a Boy Scouts of America camp in Robbers Cave State Park in Oklahoma. So at the camp, these two groups were kept separate from each other, and they were encouraged to bond as two individual groups through the pursuit of common goals that required some cooperation, planning, and execution of some activities. So during this first phase, what was important is the creation of these in-groups, so that they bonded with each other. The members of each group bonded with each other. And they didn't know about the other group's existence, okay? So the boys developed an attachment to their groups throughout the week. They established their own cultures and group norms, and they did various activities together, like hiking, swimming, other sports activities. And the boys chose the names for their groups. So there were the Eagles and the Rattlers. Okay, and they put those names on their shirts and flags. So and then the next phase of the experiment came. So Sheriff arranged the competition. This is the competition stage, where friction between the groups was to occur over the next 4-6 days. So in this phase, it was intended to bring the two groups into competition with each other in conditions that would create frustration between them. So a series of competitive activities, such as baseball, tug of war, etc., were arranged with a trophy being awarded on the basis of accumulated team score. And there were also individual prizes for the winning group, such as the medal and the multi-bladed pocket knife, with no consolation prizes being given to the losers. Okay? So at first, they expressed verbally certain prejudice, let's say, through taunting and name calling. But as the competition continued, this expression took a more direct route. So they were calling each other directly these names. And then the Eagles burned the Rattlers' flag, and the next day the Rattlers ransacked the Eagles' cabin, overturned their beds, and stole their property. And the groups became so aggressive with each other that researchers had to physically separate them. So during the subsequent 2 days cooling off period, the boys listed features of the two groups, and they tended to characterize their own group in a very favorable terms, and the outer group in a very unfavorable terms. So keep in mind that the participants in this study were regular, well-adjusted boys, not some not problematic boys. And this study clearly showed that conflict between groups can trigger prejudice and attitudes and discriminatory behavior even with regular, ordinary people. And this confirmed Sheriff's realistic conflict theory. Okay, so this is all for today. There is a lot of important concepts, processes, and group dynamics that we covered today. So please have a look at the PowerPoint slides and look at those videos, because they're very important, because they will show you firsthand how these experiments were handled. I wish you a very good weekend, and I will see you next time. Thanks for listening.